Aaron Boone spoke to the media for the first time today as spring training is underway. Pitchers and catchers reported for the New York Yankees. He had some comments, and we had to talk to our New York Yankees beat writer, Greg Joyce, about those. Greg, how you doing, man?
Good. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing well, and we heard Aaron Boone say the Yankees are hell-bent on being a champion. He talked about an elite offense, discussed some injury news already. So let's talk about this. Greg, what was your takeaways from what Aaron Boone had to say to the media and fans?
Yeah, this time of year, there's always a lot of optimism. Starting off spring training with guys who have, hey, seeing guys who are in quote unquote the best shape of their life, who had great off seasons, all this, healthier than where they were at the end of last season. But I think with that, there's a dose of reality too for the Yankees in terms of there was a lot of talk about, having these high hopes and expectations, but also knowing that they need to go out and prove it. Right? This time last year, they also had a lot of high hopes and expectations for that group, and obviously it ended up in an 82 and 80 season that was unacceptable to them in a lot of ways. So they've kind of spent the offseason using that as fuel to make sure it doesn't happen again. Obviously, addressing the roster with some new faces on there, but also just they have a lot of guys, internal guys that they're hoping and banking on having bounce back seasons. So there's a fair amount of talk about that, but also knowing that they can talk all they want about it until at a certain point they got to go out and prove it, and that might not even be done in spring training, right? Like by the time these 6 weeks are up, there's still going to be some questions going into the season to make sure that these guys kind of put together a bounce back season and put together the kind of season that they believe they're capable of, because they do have the reigning AL Cy Young winner in Garrett Cole and two of the top five hitters in the game in Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. But obviously they need a strong supporting cast behind those guys, and it's going to be a kind of a wait and see to figure out if a lot of those guys can take a step forward this year.
Yeah, Greg, you mentioned a lot of the players that Boone is looking for to get back in camp in good shape and see if they can have bounce back years. One of those guys you spoke to is Carlos Rodon this week. We saw the pictures of him looking in better shape. He says he's in great shape, ready to rock and roll this season. Obviously, a very disappointing year last year for him in that first year of a 6-year deal that he signed with the Yankees. So he's one of those guys, but not only him, but Nestor Cortez as well, coming off the shoulder issues last year. Are those the two guys you're focused on specifically for this starting rotation right now for the Yankees?
Yeah, I think there's a lot on both of those guys' shoulders, right? Both got off to rocky starts last spring. Cortez was going to pitch in WBC, and then a couple days before he got to camp, he strained his hamstring. Didn't end up pitching in the WBC, but kind of rehabbed the hamstring throughout camp. Kind of rushed it back a little bit and thought to start the season on time. Started the season, didn't quite look like himself. Eventually led to a rotator cuff strain that he had a recurrence of later in the season. So it just never kind of, and he thought there might be some correlation between rushing back on the hamstring to kind of compensating and having, hurting his shoulder. And so, and then in Rodon's case, he had one Grapefruit League start last year, and then a couple days later it was revealed that he had a forearm muscle strain, which knocked him out until July, and he had back issues come back from that. So it was just this whole string of things that neither guy really got off on the right foot. Obviously, they're hoping that with a full off season, especially for Rodon, this was his first full off season with the organization. They're kind of able to stay on top of him and make sure that he's getting his work in the right way. He's been in Tampa since early January, the first week of January. He didn't have an exact number of how much weight he's lost, but it was pretty clear that he's leaned up a little bit. He looks a little slimmer. We'll see what that looks like in terms of when he gets on the mound, but it seems like a better place to start, that he's in better shape than maybe he was this time last year. So, and he knows that there's a lot, on his shoulders this year too. He wasn't happy with the way he pitched last year, and especially for a guy that has as big of a contract as he did. And after this offseason, when they weren't able to reel in Yamamoto to provide like a strong number two behind Cole, he knows that there's some pressure there, and he said he has more to prove too. So I think both those guys have a lot riding on them as part of their rotation this season.
Yeah, Greg. And then the wrap up to the rotation part of this all is that your point about the depth behind here and relying on a Rodon, relying on a Cortez. They signed Marcus Stroman. You have Clark Schmidt coming back, but it seems like it's really thin after that. How are you sensing Aaron Boone and the Yankees feel about this starting rotation heading into spring training here?
Yeah, it's a rotation that has a lot of potential, but there's there's a lot of ifs to it too, which you don't necessarily want for a team that's, supposed to be all in this year when, you have one guaranteed year of having Juan Soto on your team, and kind of got to make the most of it. But, with any team, you're going to use beyond those five pitchers. And for the Yankees, most of the guys that were going to be in that conversation they used to acquire Soto in the trade with the Padres. So Michael King, Johnny Brito, Randy Vasquez, Drew Thorpe are all in San Diego with the Padres right now. And so it's going to be a kind of a new group of guys that will have to prove that they can be ready for the spot starts, however long they may, be called upon, like Vasquez and Brito were last year. So, right now, prospects wise, that's Will Warren, who probably maybe the first guy called up whenever they need a spot start. He finished the year in AAA last year. Chase Hampton is another guy with a high ceiling. Maybe he's a little bit behind Warren in terms of the development, but at some point this season, you would expect him to be ready. They also have a guy like Luis Gil, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery. They have signed guys like Cody Petit, Luke Weaver, who we saw at the end of last year. They kind of seem to think there was something there. So this group of guys that are largely unproven, but so were the guys last year who kind of provided some depth, at this time last year. So Aaron Boone, talked today about how he's excited about that group, and we'll see whether that group is kind of up to the task, because there is gonna be a time when at least a couple of those guys are leaned on, and their success. We'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes is definitely a way to put it, Greg, when you talk about this rotation, because there is so much on the line. It feels like when you look at the way this roster has been constructed by Brian Cashman, there's a lot of 1-year guys who are basically going into their walk years in free agency, not Juan Soto being the biggest, but Verdugo, Gleyber Torres on the offensive side. But the pitching is, like you said, it's those names that you mentioned, Warren, Hampton, Weaver, these guys, you're going to be relying on them because you can't just exactly rely on 5 guys to be healthy all season long. Even with a guy like Garrett Cole has been your horse, those other guys have had a history of getting injured. So it's a very scary proposition. It feels like, with the Yankees heading into spring training, saying we're going to rely on these 5 and some down in the depth. It's going to be interesting to see how that situation develops. And like you said, we'll see how it goes. The other thing we talked about and we alluded to is Aaron Boone saying, I think this can be an elite offense. They got a bevy of left-handed bats to join this team in this offseason. They addressed that because this was a right-handed dominant lineup. You have Verdugo, you have Juan Soto, you added Trent Grisham to here as well. So do you feel with this lineup currently, the way it's shaping up to be, is this going to be an elite offense compared to last season where they were in the bottom ranks in almost all baseball in every major offensive statistical category?
Yeah, it definitely has the potential to be one of the better offenses, but we would have said the same thing this time last year, right? Because you didn't expect quite as many guys to fall off the way they did. But that said, it should be a deeper and more balanced lineup than they had last year. Like you said, Soto and Verdugo, 2 lefties coming in that were sorely needed to have that kind of impact, left-handed impact near the top of the lineup. Last year it was really just Anthony Rizzo from the left-handed side for a bulk of the season, giving them any kind of impact. So they should have a better, more balanced lineup with some better depth. Like last year, coming out of spring training, Oswaldo Cabrera was their starting left fielder, and Aaron Hicks was the guy behind him. So it was, and now, if everybody's able to stay healthy, you have Cabrera coming off the bench as a utility guy, which is probably a better, role for him at this point. So, it has the potential to be a better offense for sure. Anthony Rizzo last year, the first 2 months of the year last year was one of, he was their most consistent hitter, and then all of a sudden, deals with concussion issues and kind of production fell off from there. They feel like he's in a good spot right now, ready to go. DJ LeMahieu in the second half of last year seemed to settle into a groove and look more like the hitter he has been for most of his career. Further past the 2 injuries that he dealt with at the end of 2022. So, Boone was talking today about ideally having him in the leadoff spot before you go to some combination of Soto and Judge, and then from there you can envision the following with Rizzo, Torres, Verdugo, Stan, and Stan's the key guy too, right?
Yeah.
We've heard a lot about how this offseason he's tried to get leaner and lighter. We'll see what that looks like, in terms of actual what he's like in the box. He's a guy that his production last season after he came back from the IL just completely fell off the table and didn't really get much from him. So it remains to be seen how much he has left in the tank to give them. He's the guy who's under contract for a couple more years, so it's not it's not something an issue that's going to go away anytime soon. So they really need him to kind of get going. I don't think anybody expects him to get back quite to the level that his peak that he showed, his MVP level form. But if he can find some middle ground there to be a productive bat more often than not, that'll go a long way in lengthening that lineup as well.
Yeah, lengthen that lineup, for him to be an impact bat this season would truly be lethal for that offense, and you would have an elite offense to your point. Young guys though, let's talk real quick about Anthony Volpe. Coming into his second season, offensively was a little bit of a struggle for him. Batting average was not great, on base percentage was not great. Had a strikeout issue, didn't do well with off speed pitches. But defensively won a Gold Glove. So what are your expectations, Greg, as Anthony Volpe enters his second season? And to stay on the young player category, what's a guy like Austin Wells, maybe an Oswaldo Cabrera, or even a Peraza? Could they make an impact for this team as well?
Yeah, so they definitely let Volpe take his lumps, his growing pains last year. Like you said, he won the Gold Glove at shortstop, which is no small feat as a rookie. Also had a 2020 season. I think it's the first Yankees rookie to do that. But that said, I think Volpe and the Yankees are both looking for more consistency out of him. We saw it in flashes last year. We could go on some runs where it looked like he was kind of figuring it out and making some adjustments. And then pitchers would adjust back to him and he'd go through another cold streak. So obviously, if he can raise that on base percentage, especially, we saw him as a base stealing threat, especially early in the season. That kind of disappeared a little bit, as the season went on. Well, a lot of it had to do with he didn't get many opportunities to be on base and steal bases. So if he can obviously raise the batting average is one thing, but getting on base would be big and cutting down on the strikeouts, like you said. Ideally he's in that 9 spot to open the season and maybe there for a while to take some pressure off of him. I think that hurt him a little bit last year when the offense kind of fell apart around him. All of a sudden he's looked at as a guy that you need him to contribute and he wasn't doing it. So maybe the pressure kind of ups last year. And so we talked about this being a deep lineup. If the guys near the top are contributing pretty consistently, that takes some of the pressure off Volpe and allows him to kind of just make his adjustments, at the bottom of the lineup. And
Right.
I think they're hoping that by allowing him to take those growing pains, throughout last year, playing almost every single day, that'll only benefit him going into the season. But they definitely need him to kind of take that step forward. Like you said, Austin Wells, we saw him in September, looked pretty good behind the plate. And the last few weeks, his bat seemed to show up too. So he's going to have a chance, I think, to earn more playing time as coming into the season. Right now, Jose Trevino has a strained calf, but they think he's going to be ready by opening day. So it seems like it could be a kind of a tandem timeshare between those two guys. But it seems like the opportunity is there for Wells to earn more playing time, but he's going to have to show continued progress behind the plate in order to do that because they really do value Trevino's defense and the work that he does with the pitching staff. So I think that's the kind of key to Wells earning more playing time as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. Wells, left-handed bat as well, could provide a little more balance against that lineup as you start piecing it together. Real quick, just to wrap up the offensive part of this spring training preview, what's your biggest X factor? Is it Giancarlo Stanton? Who is your biggest X factor, you would say, for this lineup and this offense to ultimately perform at that elite level that Boone wants?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you have DJ LeMahieu at the top of the lineup, kind of setting that tone, and then Soto and Judge behind him. But you could say Rizzo too, right? Like I said, like the last 2 months the first 2 months of last season, he was their most consistent guy day in and day out, and then the concussion kind of derailed all that. But if he can be kind of like a version of that guy that we saw the first 2 months last season, again, like all these guys don't need to be, the peak version of themselves, but if they're all better than what we saw last season, that goes a long way in kind of having a deeper lineup overall.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of career worst years if you look at how the Yankees lineup was performing last year for those big name players. And finally, the bullpen. We got some news today. Scott Efros dealing with an injury. Can you talk more about that? And also the move that the Yankees made, actually a couple moves they made in that pitching department today.
Yeah, so Efros was on his way back from Tommy John surgery that he had, I think it was in October of 2022. He was hoping to be a full go this spring, but late last fall had some back issues that led. They tried to work around it, but it led to him having back surgery in December. So he just started throwing program last week, but he's probably not going to be available to them until at some point this summer, just because he was close to the end of his throwing progression from Tommy John. So he kind of has to pick that back up and then go through the whole throwing program. So he's going to be a little bit delayed. So that opens up a job to be one in the bullpen. Maybe benefits a guy like Ron Marinaccio's chances of making the team out of camp. Obviously, every year we kind of seems to be at least one guy who surprises in a relief role in camp. Last year we saw it, Ian Hamilton. It was Marinaccio 2 years before that. So there's always, some kind of a guy, whether it's a non-roster guy or somebody that we're not thinking of. They always seem to, have pretty good success with developing some of those relief arms. So, and then like you said, they added some depth today with, they traded for Clayton Andrews, a lefty from the Brewers. He's a guy who doesn't have a ton of major league experience, but added him to the mix. And then Lou Trevino was back taking a physical today. He was a guy that they non-tendered in November. He was also coming back from Tommy John surgery like Efros. Trevino's was in May, so he's got a while to go. Probably wouldn't be a potential factor for the team, at least until the summer. But it sounds like, a contract is coming, expect to be finalized at some point here soon after taking a physical today. So he's an interesting guy to have around, especially depending on when he might be able to help you. But it doesn't sound like it would be any time until middle of the season, at least, just because it's usually, anywhere from 12 to 18 months for guys to come back from that. But, it's an interesting guy to have around whenever he is healthy.
Finally, as we get ready to start seeing these players get ready for games and things like that, for you, Greg, as you're covering this team throughout spring training, what is the one thing you're looking forward to the most from seeing from this Yankees team as they prepare for the season?
Yeah, I think it's funny. It's, for a team that has a lot of questions going into the spring training and everything, I think it's almost the addition of Soto maybe is overshadowed a little bit. But I do think there's going to be a big, maybe spectacle around him being added. You have Soto and Judge as the number 2 and 3 hitters in the lineup, and some combination has potential to be, the best, 1-2 punch, or 2-3 punch in the league with those two guys. But also just knowing that, you have this 1 year to get it done, potentially maybe the Yankees hope that they're able to kind of extend that partnership, this offseason. But
right,
it was obviously probably going to be in line for a huge payday, and who knows where he ends up. But so all they know is that they have this 1 year to try to take advantage. So it adds a lot of pressure, but also it seems like a guy that, is the kind of guy that could thrive under that pressure in the bright lights. So it'll be interesting to see, him get his feet wet with the organization and all that, and kind of adapting. But also, like I said, the guys like in the rotation, like Rodon and Cortez, and trying to see if they can get back, because there is, there's high hopes for those guys if they're able to stay healthy. But there's that fine line of, like we said, kind of the high ceiling of the rotation, but also just not knowing completely how healthy they are going to be throughout the course of the season.
Yep. Great points, Greg. And I'm looking forward to it. I know a lot of fans are looking forward to seeing you covering the team, giving us tons of updates. I'm sure we'll be speaking as we get ready for the season to start more and more about this Yankees roster. Greg, thank you so much for giving us some time and doing a little spring training preview for us, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan.